This is TEDxOshkosh TV, a complimentary extra to the annual TEDxOshkosh in-person event. In each episode of the show, we'll learn more about a past TEDxOshkosh speaker, how their talk idea is spread, and the change it has inspired.
Hi, I'm Grace Lim. I am the host of TEDxOshkosh TV. And thank you for joining us today. We have Dr. Erin Stevens, a GYN oncologist in Green Bay, Wisconsin. In 2021, Dr. Stevens gave a compelling argument on ending the war on cancer in her TEDxOshkosh talk. Before we get to our guest, I'm going to show a clip from her talk.
Maybe you've heard the slogan, finish the fight. Or maybe told a loved one, don't give up. You're a fighter. You're going to beat this after their cancer diagnosis. War metaphors are supposed to create a steely mentality in the individual, to prepare for battle, to attack, to fight, to win.
Dr. Stevens, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So in your talk, you also said, what is cancer anyway? And you answered, cancer is simply a cell that forgot how to die. It is not a foreign invader on enemy soil. Cancer is just us. So what are we actually fighting? Are we just fighting ourselves? What did you mean by that?
Well, I think when people first get diagnosed with cancer, they think of it often as if cancer happened to them, that they were infected like by a virus or something. And people are afraid, like, could I catch cancer? And we talk about this fight against cancer only to find that it's our own cells that are making mistakes as they're growing and dividing. It's often not something you did wrong. A lot of cancer is just dumb bad luck. And so the idea that your own cells are what you're fighting in this situation can kind of put a cancer patient into that mindset of like, but I'm doing this treatment, this poison that kills my bad cells as well as my good cells, and it's really me, and it's really starts to kind of mess with their minds a little bit. And I think that's where, as we get into the metaphors and the conversations with cancer, talking about all of these emotions that the patients have becomes really important.
So what made you decide to pitch this idea to that TEDxOshkosh?
Well, during that time, this started during the pandemic. I actually did my first pitch during 2020, which was a virtual pitch night because we were all stuck in our houses at that point, with the exception of people like me who were going into a hospital as well. But I was thinking a lot about the dichotomies that we were putting ourselves into, good and bad, happy and sad, and just the idea that the language we were using, both in the pandemic itself and how it really came about in my cancer patients, was making communication and talking about things not as good as I thought it could be. And so as we went through the pitch for TEDx and how my talk evolved, it really came down to there was more than just fighting that we could talk about.
Have you shared that idea with your colleagues?
Yeah, so when my TEDx talk, as part of that preparation for TEDx, we're told to practice our talk twice a day for the month leading up to the presentation. And so I actually put it out there for my friends and colleagues. Once I was invited as a speaker and had my talk started to be fleshed out, because we were getting really good at Zoom at that point, I had my friends and family, other colleagues, listen to my talk and give me feedback initially, and then just listen to me as I practiced and refined it as I went. And I had lots of my colleagues that were really like, yeah, this is something to think about. This is great. Like, this is something we need to share in our societies, in the American college, to share it in our societies, like ASCO, which is the American Society of Clinical Oncology, and then my own society that's near and dear to my heart, the Society of GYN Oncology. They actually featured part of me speaking at TEDx as one of the things that happened to those of us in the pandemic, as a look at the things that come out of this time.
So did this idea come to you from, say, interactions with your patient? Like they say, oh, I have to fight this, I have to beat this.
Yeah, so there was a lot of that, and a lot of that idea of fighting something and the losing, the language of they lost their battle, it never sat right with me. And I've definitely read articles over the years that really patients spoke about how they didn't like this language around cancer. They didn't like feeling like they were losing. I didn't like talking to my patients when they were losing. And it really made me think about, how to talk about death. And one of the things I'm very grateful for my parents is both of them were very clear with me about what things were important to them about end of life and how to talk about end of life. And that allowed me to talk to my patients about that. And that really started to open up a lot more words than just fighting in that situation. But I definitely struggle when I have patients that come and are talking about fighting, and we're really needing to get to that deeper part of that conversation about living when they're still in that fight mentality.
Do you find that their family members are the ones who really want them to fight? You have to beat this, we need you.
And that fear. There's that fear that comes with that. Like a lot of the family members, you don't want to let your mom go. You don't want to let your daughter go. You don't want to let your sister go. You don't want to let your friend go. And because we really don't talk about death in our society, it makes it really hard. And so, a lot of that fight, like, well, you gotta do this. You gotta do this. We need to be able to talk about what it looks like when you don't do it. And that was, as I practiced my talk, that was one of the things I learned. When I gave it to my childhood best friend, she's like, I don't get it. What are you talking about? I said, I have to be explicit here that we're talking about dying. Like, that's part of the cancer process, is that conversation we need to have about what happens when we die. And that allowed me to evolve my talk too, to really talk about that aspect of cancer care, and then how that really transitions us into talking about living.
Did the way you practice your medicine, your care for your patient, did it change or did it evolve because of your, the way because of this talk?
It absolutely has. I think I have always been the type of doctor that really wanted to tell my patients how it is, what was going on. I didn't want to be that person who, that I had trained under, who would tell a patient, like, you're going to beat this, and then walk out of the room and tell us residents, well, she should really sign up for hospice. And I'd be like, how did we go from one to the other? What do you mean? And why aren't we telling her that that's the situation she's in? So I always thought it was really important that I share with my patients what I thought was going on. And I've definitely told them along the ways, like, I hope to be wrong. I hope that you don't have 6 months to live. I hope that this next drug is what's going to make the difference. But if it doesn't, what are the things that are important to you? What are the things that you still want to do? And how do we make sure that you're doing those things in what could be your last months of life, and not necessarily have you hooked up to an infusion unless that's what you really want?
Wow, that is so different from what what little I know about, medicine. You opened your talk with about a story about a patient. Tell me how that came about. What was it about her that compelled you to share her story?
So, Tennille and I were very, very close in age. And so when I met her in my office when she came in at 37, if we weren't in my office, she was somebody I would have went and grabbed a coffee with and probably would have been great friends with. And I still consider her and her husband and their family people that are my friends. And so we had a good relationship because Tennille was also really down to earth. I remember when she recurred early on, having a conversation with her and having a conversation then after surgery with her husband, where he recorded the conversation and played it back for her later. And both of them had two totally different interpretations of my exact same words of what I was saying. Her husband thought it meant that she was going to die that Christmas. And she was like, but this was what we always knew was the case. And now we're just moving on to the next step. Tennille actually died right around the time I was planning my talk, and in the TED fashion of telling a story, She was really that person that I wanted to bring my story in, because Tennille really lived an amazing life.
And what was the response from her family after they saw the talk?
Her husband shared the talk on social media, and I talked about his smooth radio voice. He is a radio DJ and does advertisements and voiceovers and stuff like that. And I know it was hard for him to watch, especially because her story comes up so close in the beginning. But he was really proud and grateful that I was willing to share her story and talk more about her to help keep her alive.
What was what was it like to talk to a live audience and with the cameras on you? Tell us about that.
Well, I think one of the things, I've definitely given talks. I've given talks at medical conferences. I've given talks to patients and survivors. But the lights at TEDx are quite bright. You really cannot see anybody in the audience when you are speaking up on stage. And I didn't expect that piece of things. But I tried to take that moment to really kind of take it in and be able to look around the grand and see the furry, fuzzy faces in the audience, and think like, okay, this is a talk that hopefully will make a difference.
Your talk was a little over 12 minutes long, and I thought that you were incredible. You gave an incredible talk. You were gently persuasive.
Thank you.
I mean, was there anything you would have done differently?
No, because as I mentioned about that rehearsing, I think that was really I've given talks where I've just gone up and talked off the cuff. I very often will tell people, tell me how long you need me to talk for, and I will fill that amount of time. But there's those old sayings of, if you have 2 hours to talk, you don't need a lot of time to prepare. But when you're trying to keep something short, it takes a lot more preparation to really make sure you get your point across. And being able to practice that with my friends and family on Zoom was really an awesome experience. Was getting to share that with them before, having them have moments. And it was things like my childhood best friend's sister listened to my talk. My band director in high school listened to my talk. The person I look up to most in my society, Dr. Amanda Nichols-Fader, was the last person to listen to my talk before I gave it at TEDx. And I was probably more nervous to give it to her than I was to give it on stage that next night. So, and she was part of who was sharing my talk with our society. That's
awesome. Was there something that surprised you about your talk and the aftermath of it?
I think I wasn't surprised, but I enjoyed the conversations that I had with people after, or people who have seen the talk, or for example, some patients have Googled me before they come to see me, and then my talk comes up, and that becomes something that we talk about as part of their first appointment. But I had many people that came up to me and said, "Ooh, I didn't realize that if I said it this way, that maybe I wasn't letting my friend feel sad." We talk about this with grief too. I mean, a cancer diagnosis is a form of grief, and we struggle as a society of dealing with emotions that we consider sad or negative. And we also try to put everything into two boxes a lot. We really like the dichotomies, the good and the bad, the happy and the sad. And really, life is a spectrum, and life is often two things at the same time.
I have family members who've had cancer and have died of cancer, and I now am questioning how I talk to them. I mean, my dad died of pancreatic cancer, and I just remember telling him that, "Daddy, you gotta fight this." And I think that he was probably feeling like he was letting me down because he couldn't fight it.
And I think that's where it comes from. I think there are some people that really love the fight language. And, if it is something that's important to them, my job as their doctor is to use that fight language for them, if that's important. But especially as we transition into moments where patients are going to die of their cancer, trying to get people on board with, okay, let's Let's not talk about fighting anymore. Let's talk about hope. Let's talk about living. Let's talk about what's important. And get away from the language that's going to make you feel like you're losing and might make that person feel like they're less than.
I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you learned this in med school.
No, this is, as I said, this is something, both of my parents were very good about talking about things that were important to them at end of life. And I also think we are doing a much better job, both in medical schools and in practice, at starting to talk to patients about more than just, here is your drug, take your drug, go on. But really having these conversations. And that's why I went into medicine. I went into medicine because I liked to talk to and care for other people. I treat medicine as a way to educate people. I get to educate them about their bodies and about what goes wrong with their bodies and how we fix that. And if we can't fix that, how we manage that. And when we're faced with the end of our life, what we want that to look like. Because I think that can be beautiful. I think there is so much that can be done for beautiful deaths that teach children and loved ones how we can transition from this earth to whatever may come next.
Given this talk and having so many people have watched it, has it prepared you for what you think your journey is going to be when the time comes?
Well, so as I said, my parents were very open about their wishes. And my father and I actually had a conversation a few months before he died about his quality of life and what was important to him and how he was hitting the point where his quality of life wasn't what he wanted anymore. And what did it look like when we managed that? And how did we have these talks? And those weren't talks I ever planned on having with my dad. My mom has always been very open about not wanting to be resuscitated, not wanting to be intubated. And it's important that I know that so that I can honor her wishes as she ages. But these are, I think my parents really, really helped me along in that way.
That's awesome. So just to recap, we're definitely going to have a link to your talks for those who haven't seen it. What would you want to people to take away from your talk?
I think, as we went through my talk and I talked about what cancer was, and then talked a little bit about the language around it and how, it can make the patient not be able to share all their emotions. The other part of my talk that I got to at the end was that, well, what do we do? We have this desire as humans to want to make people feel better when there is literally nothing we are going to say that is going to make them feel better. And sometimes it's a matter of just sitting there and saying, I love you, I am here, and just being present in the moment with the patient. I ended my talk with a quote from Megan Devine, which is that some things in life cannot be fixed, they can only be carried. And that's from her books on grief. And it goes along with this too. We have this burning desire to fix things. I, as a surgeon, want to fix things. And sometimes we can't. And when we can't, we have to be there as humans in that moment. And that's what I want people to take from it, is to learn how to sit with that discomfort, but to really be there for another human. And those moments are what make us living a good life.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time and being here and sharing your stories with us. This is Grace Slim. Thank you for joining us on this episode of TEDxOshkosh TV.
Visit TEDxOshkosh.com to view the complete talks of all past TEDxOshkosh speakers, as well as more episodes of TEDxOshkosh TV.